Psylocke Fractured Frontier was much hyped, but how has she done living up to it? Psylocke Fractured Frontier is a 3/4 with an on reveal that gives every 5 or greater cost card in your hand 1 less cost. But if you quick draw her, she does it to your entire hand instead. And this is a particularly interesting card because she definitely is not as generic as her quick draw might make her appear. If you're going to be putting Psylocke into your deck, you're going to be thinking about what she is most of the time. And most of the time, she is going to be a 3/4 that discounts the 5 costs and up in your hand. This gives her a very specific role, and she starts showing up in very specific decks. She is a new card, so right now she's seeing pretty wide play, but I've been mostly disappointed with her in a wide scenario. When I build a deck and I put Psylocke Fractured Frontier in it, I need to have a very concrete idea of what I am doing if I draw her and am unable to quick draw her. So if she's in my opening hand, I need her to not be useless. I need her to be functional, right? And that means that I need to have some really good expensive targets for her. I've seen people playing her with Thanos Fractured Frontier, which I don't actually think does particularly well. In part because Thanos Fractured Frontier is so seemingly custom built to be a good turn 5 play that accelerating him out doesn't actually upgrade him necessarily. In fact, it might even cost you a shot. So you end up with a card that is very solid, and I have no arguments against it, but it does seem like it needs a more specific space. So let's talk about a couple of cards that are really useful to power out early with Psylocke that might help get your juices flowing. Exhibit A, I think, is Sarah. One of the things that Psylocke is not so secretly asking you is, when you don't quick draw me, what is it that you are going to do? What is it that I bring to the table? And that is, in my opinion, very clearly something that Sarah answers. Basically, what you want out of Psylocke are 5s that are really good if you get them down earlier, and 6s that are really good if you get them down earlier. Sarah is sort of the poster girl for a 5 that comes down and is game defining on 5. But if you get her down on 4, that's a whole extra turn of her acceleration that you can have access to. This is a great example of a card that I think will be paired with Psylocke Fractured Frontier for as long as they're around, basically, and cards that are kind of like that. An engine card that is expensive, that benefits from you having it on the board face up. That's the stuff that you're building Psylocke decks around. Another example, and this one mostly shows up in the Thanos lists, but a card like Mockingbird is really, really solid to hit with a Psylocke proc because getting an extra discount on a card that is stacking discounts to the degree that Mockingbird can is very, very solid. Hitting just normal Thanos, not even the Fractured Frontier one, again, you get like stack that discount with a Time Stone. Suddenly, you're starting to see some real additional acceleration of big units out of a deck like that otherwise tend to conflict. One of the things that this deck has really enabled between, when you look at the Thanos decks, one thing that I've been really struck by is when you play Thanos Fractured Frontier on turn 5, and maybe you've played a Psylocke beforehand, who knows, you are very able to play other things and an Aurora. And Mockingbird being one of those other things is really solid. Like, let's say you played a Psylocke Fractured Frontier that wasn't quick drawn, and then a Thanos that had the green shot loaded. You're going to be able to play Mockingbird and an Aurora as long as you have 2 stones on the board. Very reasonable thing to be asked of you, not even to get into the Wiccan stuff. So I've also been impressed with Psylocke in these shells for enabling them to be a little bit more surprising with their final turns. In the Sarah camp, I have been fairly impressed with Psylocke in the Scorpion Brand New Day lists. Again, we're talking about a card that really wants to be accelerated out. You want to get Scorpion down and then the turn after duplicate his effect as many times as you can and then play a hazmat. Psylocke will enable you to do this by making sure that you can get a Scorpion onto the board on 5, which is a very important thing to be doing. She is a little bit like worse Luna Snow some of the time when she's doing this, but it is very, very, very real that she is able to accelerate this card out, and that is a part of her profile. And that's actually where we're going to start for decks here. This is a Scorpion list that KMWorst has been playing. I've been tooling around with it a little bit, but one of the things that really sticks out to me is I think that right now there are a couple really good ways to beat Thanos FF decks. They are not playing a ton of interaction outside of Thanos's Soulstone, and they typically are not playing location control unless they are specifically the double Thanos list. So other than that, I feel like this list has a bunch of really good matchups into Thanos decks. Part of it is just that it combos really well, and the other part is that they don't really have answers to magic. And because of the way Thanos decks tend to build themselves, there are a lot of things that make sense in a 6-turn game that don't make sense in a 7-turn game. And Thanos Fractured Frontier, I should say, is a card that incentivizes you to run a decent amount of cheaper stuff. All that cheaper stuff is awesome when you're trying to cram as much output as you can into a 6-turn game, but it's not nearly so good when there is a 7th turn that is actually taking up some time. That is part of what makes this deck super strong right now, is that Magic is just adding a 7th turn that none of these Thanos decks are particularly equipped to use. It's actually fairly similar to how good Magic was against Sholau lists, another deck that is very built for the 6th turn and not really for a 7th one. So as long as you're in this space, I think you're going to be doing pretty well against Thanos stuff specifically. What I like about this deck is that it kind of just doesn't need a lot to make things happen. You can do things like get multiple Sarahs or and then use that to get multiple other Scorpions. And then once you do that, like, you just kind of win the game. Like, yeah, me and KMWorst were playing this game in a Discord call yesterday. There were multiple games where it was just like, oh yeah, 5 Scorpions, 4 Scorpions, and people were just staying. There's interaction that's obviously good here. There are going to be decks that are able to deal with what you do, but you have a shocking amount of play around it. Now, granted, Mobius not great, Cosmo not great, Juggernaut not great, all that's true. But right now, a bunch of people are playing Thanos decks that are just like Wiccan decks, and you're going to beat them ruthlessly. Another thing that you'll see a lot with Psylocke Fractured Frontier is Sarah Blink things. The basic premise is that if you're playing Sarah and Blink with Psylocke, what you'll do is you'll play Psylocke, then on 4, you'll either play Blink or Sarah. Because of the way the deck is built, it'll go get the other one. So you will basically be trying to lock yourself in to the ability to have 2 turns of Sarah, and that is going to be a decent amount of what this deck is trying to do. Basically, it's saying, okay, if I get to quick draw the Psylocke, that's awesome, that's cool, I love it. If I don't get to quick draw the Psylocke, I am still going to accelerate into 2 turns of massive energy cheat. This is a deck that I think a lot of people don't necessarily have the most respect for, but it does do a lot of solid work in a world where point output is not necessarily what it used to be. We're in a very mid-range metagame right now, and it can be a real treat to play a deck that just does a ton of points in a world where other people are playing a bunch of mid-range decks. You're going to cheat so much energy when you play a deck like this. It is a really solid and powerful thing to do. I really do want to shout out, though, specifically Storm Horseman is such an important piece to making sure that you're getting your output down. I do think that a lot of the time you're going to want to play the Psylocke on 3 into the Sarah on 4, but make sure you are taking those first 2 turns off, because before you output all your points on the final turn of the game, you are definitely going to want to buff your hand on turn 5 thanks to Storm. So please do take that into account when you're playing this list. Storm is awesome, absolutely phenomenal, and a big part of the power output here. But this is just a classic, easy to play Sarah Surfer list that has improved its own consistency by virtue of the fact that it now has multiple ways to accelerate out a Sarah on turn 4. We're getting pretty close to deterministic. You have both Luna Snow and Psylocke. You play them on 3. You have either Sarah or Blink in hand. You are going to get a turn 4 Sarah. That's a really consistent way to get to levels of output that are very, very powerful in Marvel Snap. The Thanos Go Wide Shell is another space that I've seen and been impressed by Psylocke in large part because of the wide variety of large dudes in a deck like this. There's quite a few reasonable hits for a Psylocke, and obviously if you ever quick draw her, it's unbelievably good, but really just discounting some of the big guys can be really, really solid, especially when those discounts can be compounded. Mockingbird getting an additional discount is just a really good thing to do. I can't tell you how many many times I've been upset that I can't play my Mockingbird by 1 point of energy cost. And the fact that it's not just discounting the Mockingbird, but it's also discounting other things that you would play alongside the Mockingbird. Like your ability to do something like play Psylocke Fractured Frontier into Thanos with the Greenstone, into Mockingbird Aurora, things like that. Like that is just a lot more power than this deck previously had. And I think there's a lot to be said for adding a lot of not just power. It's power, yes, but it's also flexibility and unpredictability. When you're just an Aurora deck playing Thanos stuff, that sucks. It's not good because your opponent can sit there and spend their entire turn being like, if they play Aurora here, I can win. If they play Aurora here, I can win. Being predictable is bad. What Psylocke does is not just make you stronger, but make you more unpredictable. And I do think that this is a shell that she makes a ton of sense in terms of adding some additional upside to a deck that really does have a lot of points in it, but does struggle with using all of its board spaces too early and being a little bit predictable when it does so. Being able to get more big guys down is important, not just for power output, but for efficient use of board slots. And I do think that it feels like a meaningful upgrade to the archetype, and this deck feels like about as good as any Thanos list has been in a really long time. And yes, some of that is down to Thanos Fractured Frontier being awesome with his older brother, older variant, whatever they are awesome together because the Thanos stones are really good ways to enable Thanos Fractured Frontier, and they benefit heavily from a lot of the things that he does. They're great together, but I don't think that you should sleep on Psylocke here. She is actually helping. I've also seen Psylocke in Ramp. I don't know how sold I am on her here, which is to say, I do like the concept of I'm building my Psylocke deck to not care about the second half of it. But you've really built this deck to not care about the second half. Like, wow, we do not care about the second half at all. And this is one of those situations where it's like, I know Luna Snow is giving my opponent energy, but she's also a 3/6, right? Like, I am not doing anything with this additional second half. What I am doing with Psylocke is playing like mid Luna Snow here. I'm a lot less sold on this than I think you might imagine. I think it's probably better than when we played Superior Spider-Man as a third one, but gun to my head, I think it is safer to play it as a third one than replace Luna Snow with it, as this list has done. That said, I mean, if you want to just take Jubilee out, put Luna Snow in, it's like that's a perfectly acceptable ramp list, and she's definitely like the third best thing to be doing in that slot. And if you want to play 3 rampers, which sometimes this deck definitely does want to play 3 rampers, you can definitely play her as an option there. There's nothing wrong with that. This is a deck that has a lot of benefit from her, but it's definitely not going to be as good as the consistent energy output from the other 2, which allow you to play the cards you draw and not just the cards that were in hand at the time of playing Psylocke. There was a lot of hype for Psylocke Fractured Frontier. I don't think she's delivered on it. That's not to say she's a bad card, though. I think she's just a little more specific than what might be needed right now. I think that she's a card that's sort of in the Luna Snow Prodigy range, where it's like, this is very clearly a card that is good at doing something very specific, and whether that very specific thing is good is not really dependent on her right now, and I think that that is ultimately kind of the thing that she runs into. I will say it does feel like the strongest thing she does is add consistency as a 3-cost into Sarah Ramper, so you can stack discounts on top of discounts. That feels like something a lot of those decks were meaningfully missing. So if you were playing a deck that's like Luna Snow Sarah, basically anything that was playing those 2 cards is gonna want her. And I think there are other homes for her. I've enjoyed her in the Thanos stuff. I think she's a good third option in the ramp stuff, but this is not the kind of card that I describe as like a staple or anything. Like, she has roles. It's a pretty specific role. I think Luna Snow's a little more generic and will go in more decks, but if you are playing Luna Snow Sarah, you're going to want to pick her up. That's sort of where my head is at for her. I think she's a solid role player of a card that has some really good, powerful moments, but mostly if you try to build around her, you'll notice that there's other things in her lane that are about as good or better at doing that in the deck you're playing, whether that be the ramp deck where both the other rampers are better, or sometimes just Luna Snow stuff, so you can actually play the cards that you top deck. That is a meaningful upgrade, even if your opponent is getting energy, because a lot of the premise of a Luna Snow Sarah deck is, I don't care how much energy my opponent is getting, I'm doing some kind of combo that means that I'm doing more points than anything they could possibly dream of because of the way my deck is built versus the way their deck is built. I'm just going to use this energy better. And I think that that ultimately means that this is much more role player, workman-like kind of card than was originally anticipated. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.